Long before the pyramids touched the sky, before Rome, before Egypt, and before history itself began, there was a place where time seemed to awaken. It lay between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in a land so fertile and ancient that the people who lived there called it simply the land between waters. From that soil rose the world's first cities, the world's first kings, and the first words ever written by human hands. They called themselves the Sumerians, and somehow, 5,000 years before our time, they built a civilization so advanced that it still defies explanation. They carved thousands of clay tablets that spoke of laws, trade, mathematics, astronomy, and gods who ruled from the heavens. They created the first schools, the first written language, and perhaps the first clear vision of what it meant to be human. But there was something strange about them, something that even the most skeptical historians still struggle to explain. The Sumerians seemed to appear out of nowhere. No earlier culture slowly evolved into theirs. There was no trace of the primitive villages that should have come before the cities of Uruk, and Eridu. Instead, they emerged fully formed, with temples, irrigation systems, and a written script already perfected. It was as if they had inherited knowledge from someone, or something, else. They measured the stars with mathematical precision. They divided time into 60 seconds, an hour into 60 minutes, and a circle into 360 degrees. They mapped the motion of Jupiter and Saturn with an accuracy that modern science only rediscovered millennia later. They spoke of gods who lived for tens of thousands of years, and of a great flood that once destroyed the world. Yet these were not just myths told by poets. These stories were written on clay, hardened by fire, and buried deep beneath their cities. And every time archaeologists uncover a new tablet, the mystery grows deeper. Among their most haunting records lies the Sumerian king list, a document that names rulers said to have reigned for impossible spans of time, 30 or 40,000 years each. Then, one short line separates the kings before the flood from those who came after. Was this only mythic symbolism, or a coded record of a cataclysm the world has long forgotten? In Eridu, the city said to be founded by the god Enki, archaeologists found temples built one atop another, layer upon layer, as if civilization itself was trying to remember something older. In Uruk, the Temple of Eanna hides foundations that predate known Sumerian culture. Some researchers whisper that what lies below might belong to a civilization even more ancient, one that Sumer merely inherited. Their texts speak of me, the divine laws or codes of the universe said to govern everything from kingship to love to war. They mention the Tablet of Destinies, a shining, humming object that gave power to whoever held it. They recorded the motion of a wandering star, the Star of Marduk, which appeared, disappeared, and returned across the ages. Some say it was Jupiter, others call it Nibiru. Whatever it was, when it came, the gods left, and soon after the cities of Sumer fell silent. Archaeologists call it coincidence, mythologists call it allegory. But what if the Sumerians were trying to warn us, or remember something that truly happened? Every ruin, every tablet, every line of cuneiform seems to echo a single truth. Humanity's story may have begun long before we think it did. Tonight, we will uncover these mysteries, from the birth of the Sumerians to the secrets they left buried beneath the sands. If you love ancient mysteries and forgotten civilizations, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others. When the first archaeologists dug into the dust of southern Iraq in the early 20th century, they thought they were uncovering the ruins of Babylon. Instead, they found something far older. Beneath layers of desert and time, beneath cities that had already been forgotten, lay a civilization no one had expected. Around 3,500 years before the Common Era, the first great cities in human history rose from the flat plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu appeared with streets, temples, laws, writing, and mathematics already in place. Their builders called themselves the Sumerians. Civilizations are supposed to evolve slowly, with small farming villages growing into towns and then into cities. But Sumer did not crawl toward greatness. It simply arrived. There is no clear record of anything that looks like a proto-Sumerian phase. Before them was the Ubaid culture. Simple farmers who left pottery and mud huts, but no writing, no organized religion, and no monumental architecture. Then, without warning, came Sumer, a society with irrigation systems, schools, astronomy, and complex administration. To archaeologists, it looked less like an evolution and more like a reset. Even now, there is no consensus about how it happened. Excavations at sites such as Eridu, Uruk, and Tel al-Ubaid show no gradual staircase of progress, no long chain of experimentation leading to this sudden explosion of complexity. It is as if someone flipped a switch around 3,500 years before the Common Era, and civilization began running at full capacity. As British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley, who excavated Ur in the 1920s, wrote, "It was as though we had opened the pages of history to find the first sentence already written." The Sumerians themselves left their own explanation, one far stranger than any modern theory. According to their creation myths, civilization was not invented by humans at all. It was given by beings from the heavens. They believed that knowledge, writing, and kingship descended from above. The god Enki, lord of wisdom and water, was said to have given humanity the divine blueprints of existence. Laws, art, music, love, and mathematics, all the principles that made civilization possible. To the Sumerians, they were not self-made, they were taught. Modern archaeology sees this story as metaphor. Yet it is remarkable how perfectly their mythology mirrors their archaeological record. A civilization with no visible origins, no prehistory, and a sudden leap in complexity, they did not develop civilization. They remembered it. That idea that humanity might be recalling rather than inventing still unsettles historians today. Among the thousands of clay tablets found in Sumer, one stands out as perhaps the most haunting document of the ancient world: the Sumerian king list. Written in cuneiform script on clay prisms, it records the names of rulers and the years they reigned. But the numbers are impossible. The first kings, the ones said to rule before the Great Flood, are given lifespans of tens of thousands of years. The very first name, Alulim of Eridu, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Al-Algar, reigned for 36,000. The list continues through a sequence of kings, each with reigns measured not in decades or centuries, but in millennia. Then, abruptly, a single line cuts through history. Then the flood swept over. After that moment, everything changes. The reigns shrink to hundreds of years, then to tens, then to spans that finally sound human. The world before the flood was the world of the gods. The world after was ours. The tablet does not explain the flood. It simply acknowledges it as the dividing line between eras. Archaeologist Thorkild Jacobsen, one of the foremost experts on Mesopotamian literature, studied the king list in detail in the 1930s. He called it a blend of myth, legend, and history. But even Jacobsen admitted that its structure was deliberate and consistent, not the random exaggeration of later scribes. To the Sumerians, these numbers meant something. Whether they represented astronomical cycles, religious time, or something more literal, no one knows. And then there is the question that refuses to go away. Why would a civilization so meticulous in accounting and mathematics record such extraordinary figures? They were not careless storytellers. They measured fields to the cubit, weighed silver to the shekel, and recorded contracts down to the last grain of barley. If their kings were said to reign for 30 or 40,000 years, the number must have meant something profound. Many scholars interpret the flood itself as a cultural memory of a real event. During his excavations at Ur, Sir Leonard Woolley discovered a layer of clean silt nearly 10 feet thick between levels of settlement. It was evidence of a massive flood around 2,900 years before the Common Era. Woolley wrote, "It was not a local inundation. It must have been an event remembered in every city of the plain." That discovery, combined with the king list's reference to the flood, has long fueled speculation that the story of Noah and other ancient deluge myths trace back to Sumerian memory. Still, the king list remains an enigma. Were the pre-flood rulers mythological, or were they something else entirely? beings the Sumerians truly believed were not of this earth. That idea may sound fantastical, but to the people of Sumer, it was simply history. Their temples, reliefs, and hymns speak of gods descending from the heavens, ruling beside kings, and teaching the arts of civilization before returning to the stars. Whether symbolic or literal, those beliefs became the foundation of their identity. If their myths described the divine order of the world, their mathematics expressed its structure. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal, or base 60, number system, a choice that still shapes modern life. 60 seconds make a minute, 60 minutes make an hour, and 360 degrees make a circle. These are not random conveniences, they are the fingerprints of Sumer. The sexagesimal system is astonishingly practical because 60 can be divided evenly by so many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. It is ideal for measuring time, trade, and geometry. But why 60? No one knows for sure. Some historians, such as Otto Neugebauer, suggested it may have arisen from combining base 10 and base 6 counting systems. Others have proposed a cosmic reason. The Sumerians tracked the movements of Jupiter and Saturn, whose great conjunction occurs roughly every 60 years. In a world where numbers and stars were intertwined, 60 might have symbolized cosmic harmony, the heartbeat of the heavens. To the Sumerians, numbers were sacred, a bridge between earth and sky. They believed that by understanding numerical order, they were aligning themselves with the structure of the cosmos. Every temple, every canal, every ziggurat was designed according to those same proportions. Time, space, and divinity were all expressions of one pattern, a pattern measured in 60s. So we return to the question that has haunted historians for generations. How did they know? How did the first civilization on Earth appear with writing, law, and mathematics already perfected? How did they conceive of a number system so elegant that 5,000 years later we still live by it? And why did they record reigns of 30 and 40,000 years before a flood that wiped the world clean? Sumer's origins remain one of history's great discontinuities, a civilization that began at the summit instead of the base. We can trace their cities, translate their tablets, and measure their brilliance, but not their beginnings. They appeared complete and luminous, like a program that had already been written. Their story reads less like invention and more like activation. A civilization that rose out of nowhere, ruled under gods who may or may not have been human, measured time in 60s, and left us their code embedded in the very structure of how we live. A civilization that appeared perfect, as though it had been programmed from the start. And if someone truly wrote that program, who were they? If you are still here, leave a like to support the channel. If the story of Sumer begins like a mystery, then the next chapters unfold like a dream. Each layer of soil, each broken brick, reveals not only how they lived but how much they seemed to know. Beneath the dust of Mesopotamia lies a civilization that rose to unimaginable heights, then vanished quietly, leaving behind fragments of mathematics, myth, and engineering that still defy belief. Long before Uruk, before Babylon, before the concept of empire, there was Eridu. Archaeologists call it the first city in human history, dating back to around 5,400 years before the Common Era. Its ruins sit near the edge of the ancient Persian Gulf in what is now southern Iraq. To the Sumerians, Eridu was sacred. They said it was where kingship first descended from heaven, the place where civilization itself began. Excavations at the site of Tel Abu Shahrain uncovered layer after layer of construction, 17 in total, stacked like geological time. Each layer was a temple dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. The lowest levels were simple shrines of reed and mud brick. Later layers grew into ziggurats, massive platforms of fired clay that dominated the skyline. What startled archaeologists was not just the depth of time, but the sudden precision of the later structures. Somewhere between the oldest and the newest, the architecture transformed from primitive huts to mathematically perfect temples aligned with the stars. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The city was abandoned around 2,000 years before the Common Era. There are no signs of battle, no burned walls or toppled idols. The people simply left. Some scholars believe that shifting coastlines and drought forced them away, part of a regional climate collapse around that period. Others whisper of something stranger, that a meteor or small comet may have struck nearby, disturbing the balance of rivers and soil. The truth is buried too deep to be certain. What remains undeniable is that Eridu was both cradle and tomb, the alpha of civilization that ended without a war. To the Sumerians, it was never truly gone. Later texts still called it the City of the Deep, the place where Enki resided beneath the waters of the Abzu, the cosmic ocean below the earth. For them, Eridu was not just a city, it was a gateway between the human and the divine. Among all the gods of Sumer, Enki was different. Where others ruled by strength or by decree, Enki ruled by knowledge. The myths say he possessed the me, a collection of sacred powers or divine laws that governed the universe. These me were described as physical tablets or objects, glowing and alive, that contained the structure of existence itself. They controlled everything from kingship and truth to music, emotions and technology. One Sumerian hymn, translated by Samuel Noah Kramer in the 1940s, describes Inanna visiting Enki's temple in Eridu to obtain these me. She receives them one by one, the me of wisdom, the me of music, the me of writing, the me of weaving, the me of war. Each is an element of order. Taken together, they are civilization. When she carries them away to her own city of Uruk, Enki realizes too late what he has lost. The story reads like myth, yet it conveys a striking idea: knowledge as a transferable code, something that can be moved, stored, or stolen. If we strip away the poetry, the me sound almost like data. They are described as radiant, indestructible, and incomprehensible to mortals, a kind of cosmic operating system. Some scholars interpret them as metaphors for institutions or social principles, but even so, the Sumerians saw them as tangible. They believed that the world ran on laws not only moral but physical, and that those laws had a keeper. Enki was not only god of water, he was the engineer of reality. It is no wonder that his temples were filled with priests who acted like scientists. They charted the movement of planets, measured flood levels, and experimented with mixtures of clay and metals. Every ritual was a calculation, every chant a formula. In a sense, Sumerian religion was not superstition but the first attempt to describe the operating logic of the cosmos. They just gave it divine names. When you read the myths carefully, the idea of the me feels surprisingly modern. The gods hold the blueprints of the world, and humanity advances when those blueprints are shared. Each me is a file that adds a new ability to civilization. The story of Inanna and Enki is not only a myth about ambition, it is a story about the transfer of knowledge. Civilization spreads when information moves. That obsession with order and calculation shaped their greatest inventions. Among the thousands of clay tablets recovered from Sumerian and Babylonian ruins, some contain mathematical tables so precise that even modern researchers struggle to explain them. The most famous of these is Plimpton 322, discovered in what was once the city of Lhasa and now housed at Columbia University. The tablet dates to about 1800 years before the Common Era, centuries after Sumer's political decline, but still part of its intellectual legacy. It lists 4 columns of numbers written in cuneiform. When translated, those numbers correspond to sets of right-angled triangles that perfectly satisfy the Pythagorean theorem. The implication is extraordinary. The Sumerians, or their successors, understood geometric ratios more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. In 2017, researchers Daniel Mansfield and Norman Wildberger at the University of New South Wales published a study arguing that Plimpton 322 represents an entirely different form of trigonometry, one based on ratios instead of angles. It may have been used to calculate architectural layouts or to chart the heavens. The tablet's accuracy is so high that even NASA's educational programs have referenced it in comparisons to modern computational methods. To think of Plimpton 322 as a clay computer is not an exaggeration. It was a database of algorithms, encoded in a base 60 system that allowed infinite precision with simple tools. The scribes who wrote it were engineers in every sense of the word. Their calculations reveal an intuitive grasp of relationships between numbers and shapes, a geometry that guided the design of ziggurats, canals, and celestial maps. Another Babylonian tablet, part of the same tradition, shows their approximation of pi as 3.125. When we use that value today to calculate the circumference of a circle, the margin of error is less than 1%. These were not guesses. They were deliberate results derived from consistent observation and record-keeping over centuries. What makes this even more mysterious is the question of why. Why would a society 5,000 years ago need trigonometric tables? Some historians suggest practical uses, surveying land, building temples, or tracking flood cycles. Others suspect something grander. The Sumerians were expert astronomers. Their priests recorded the movements of planets, predicted eclipses, and recognized repeating cycles in the sky. Perhaps their mathematics was not born of trade or construction, but of a desire to mirror the heavens themselves. In that sense, the Sumerians were the first cosmic engineers. They built their world to match the stars, measuring divinity in numbers. Their clay tablets were not only contracts and tax records, but tools of discovery, the earliest instruments of computation. If Eridu was the first city, then Uruk was its crown. Around 3,200 years before the Common Era, it became the largest metropolis on Earth, home to as many as 50,000 people. Towering above it stood the Eanna Temple, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, the same deity who once took the me from Enki. This temple was the heart of Sumerian religion and power, a complex of courtyards, altars, and ziggurats where priests governed both spirit and science. What fascinates modern archaeologists is not only the grandeur of Eanna, but what lies beneath it. Beneath the visible ruins are layers of older construction, strata that predate even the earliest written records. Each rebuilding added new walls atop the old, preserving what came before. Deep below the Temple of Inanna are foundations made from different materials, using techniques not seen in later periods. Some layers contain pottery styles and building methods that do not match known Sumerian craftsmanship. German archaeologist Julius Jordan, who first excavated Uruk in the early 1900s, noted that the lowest levels of the Eanna complex seemed to belong to an earlier culture. Later researchers, including those from the German Archaeological Institute, confirmed that these basal layers date back to the late Ubaid period, perhaps earlier than 4,000 years before the Common Era. That means the people who built the first stages of Eanna were not yet Sumerians, or at least not the Sumerians we recognize. This discovery fuels one of the most provocative ideas in ancient history, that the Sumerians might have inherited their foundations from an older, forgotten civilization. Beneath their temples could lie the literal and symbolic core of humanity's first great experiment with knowledge. Every generation rebuilt the Eanna on the same spot, as if protecting a memory too precious to lose. When you walk among the ruins today, you can still see fragments of those older walls, baked clay turned pink by the sun. It is as though the temple itself was designed to be a time capsule, preserving the layers of human thought. Each brick is a message, each stratum a reminder that Sumer was both an ending and a beginning. Taken together, these mysteries form a pattern. Eridu, the first city, rose and vanished without war. The Me, divine codes of creation, describe knowledge as something that can be stored and transferred. Plimpton 322 reveals a mathematical mind centuries ahead of its time. Eanna hides within its foundation the traces of a world even older than Sumer. None of these pieces make sense alone, but together they suggest something extraordinary. The Sumerians were not inventing civilization from nothing. They were continuing it, reconstructing it, perhaps even recovering it from memory. Their myths, mathematics, and monuments all point backward, toward a source that predates their own age. Every brick holds a secret. Every tablet holds a code. If someone truly built Sumer, what else did they leave buried in the dust? If you are still here, please like this video to help it reach more people. By the time the last Sumerian cities began to fade, their scribes had already turned their eyes to the sky. Everything they believed, the gods, the laws, the rhythm of life, was mirrored in the heavens. For them, the stars were not distant suns but divine travellers, each one a messenger of destiny, and among those countless points of light, they recorded something that did not belong. On a collection of tablets known as Mul, Upin, copied and recopied across centuries, Sumerian astronomer priests catalogued the stars with astonishing precision. The name Mul Apin means the plough star, but the series is more than a star chart. It is a complete celestial manual, describing risings and settings, planetary paths, eclipses, and the seasons of the gods. Modern scholars date its core material to the late 2nd millennium before the Common Era, though it draws from far older Sumerian observations that may reach back to 2000 before the Common Era. Amid its long lists of constellations lies a curious entry, a body called the Star of Marduk. Unlike the known planets, this one does not follow a predictable path. It is described as crossing the heavens obliquely, shining with a reddish hue and appearing only at great intervals. In later Babylonian texts, it becomes associated with Nibiru, the crossing star that marks the point where the paths of heaven and earth meet. To modern astronomers, it sounds like mythic poetry, yet even myth can echo observation. Some researchers have speculated that this wandering star could refer to a rare comet or interstellar visitor whose orbit carried it beyond the known planets. Every few thousand years, such bodies pass through our system, leaving brief trails of fire and confusion. In 2025, astronomers at the Atlas Survey Project, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, announced the detection of an interstellar object designated 3I Atlas. It entered the solar system on a hyperbolic path, glowing faintly red and emitting unusual signatures of nickel and carbonyl. Its orbit suggested it came from outside the Sun's influence, crossing through at an angle unlike anything bound by gravity. To some, the resemblance was uncanny. A reddish wandering star returning after millennia. The name Nibiru resurfaced, no longer in clay but in headlines. Of course, science and legend need not collide. The Sumerians were careful observers. They knew Venus as the morning star and Jupiter as the king of the planets. It is entirely possible that the Star of Marduk referred to a conjunction, an unusual comet, or a symbolic marker of cosmic renewal, but the coincidence remains striking. The same region of sky they described, the southern ecliptic where Jupiter often meets the constellations of Sagittarius and Capricornus, is where 3I Atlas will reach perihelion. To the Sumerians, every celestial event carried meaning. The return of a wandering star was not chance, it was a sign. In their myths, Nibiru was the gate through which the gods travelled between worlds, the path of the Anunnaki as they visited Earth and departed again. When that light appeared, it meant change, sometimes creation, sometimes destruction. Whether the priests of Sumer actually witnessed such an object or simply imagined it, they treated it with awe and fear. The tablets describe offerings made to appease the heavens, as if to keep balance between worlds. For them, astronomy and destiny were the same language. If the heavens told the story of the gods, the Tablet of Destinies was the book that wrote it. Among all Sumerian myths, none captures the imagination more vividly. It appears in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian retelling of Sumerian creation, and in older fragments found near Nippur. The tablet is said to grant supreme authority over the universe to whoever holds it. It flies, it shines, it utters commands. The myth tells how the god Enlil once wielded it to decree the fates of men and gods alike. Later, it was stolen by a monstrous bird named Anzu, throwing heaven and earth into chaos. The gods were powerless until the hero Ninurta retrieved it and restored order. The descriptions are eerily specific. The tablet glowed with radiance, emitted a terrifying sound, and flew from the grasp of its keeper. For centuries, readers treated this as pure symbolism, the triumph of order over chaos. Yet modern eyes cannot ignore the technological imagery. A shining, flying, sound-emitting object that transmits commands across the heavens sounds less like a stone inscription and more like something mechanical. Ancient astronaut theorists have seized on that idea, calling it a device of unimaginable power, a kind of celestial data core. Most scholars dismiss that interpretation, but it is difficult not to notice how the myth's language overlaps with descriptions of modern communication technology. The phrase Tablet of Destinies itself is telling. In Sumerian, Dup-Shemati can mean Tablet of Decrees or Tablet of Destinies, but also literally written orders. Whoever controlled it determined the structure of the cosmos, the laws of time and space. It was, in essence, the operating system of creation. In the temples of Nippur and Eridu, priests stored real clay tablets that recorded laws, inventories, and astronomical charts. Each one represented a fragment of divine knowledge. The mythic tablet of destinies may have been the ideal of those records, a perfect, indestructible version of the knowledge humans could only imitate in clay. When we hold a modern device that glows, speaks, and stores infinite information, it is hard not to feel a strange echo. The Sumerians imagined such a thing thousands of years ago. Whether metaphor or memory, the idea that knowledge could be captured in a single object has followed us ever since. As the centuries passed, Sumer's power waned. Drought and invasion eroded its cities, but its scribes kept writing until the very end. Among the last texts found in the ruins of Nippur, the spiritual heart of the Sumerian world, is a fragment known as the Prophecy of Nippur. It is damaged and incomplete, but one line survives with haunting clarity. When the star of heaven goes astray, the gods will abandon the city. No one knows exactly when it was written, but scholars place it near the collapse of the Sumerian city-states, around 2000 before the Common Era. The words suggest that the fall of civilization was linked, at least symbolically, to a celestial event. Perhaps the wandering star of Marduk returned. Perhaps a comet blazed across the sky, seen as a sign of the god's departure. To the people who carved those words, it was not mere poetry. In their worldview, the heavens and the earth were mirrors. When the order of the sky broke, the order of society followed. The flood, the fall of kings, the drying of rivers, these were not accidents but consequences of cosmic imbalance. The priests of Nippur believed that the gods literally withdrew their essence when the sky's harmony failed. The prophecy is written in the same solemn style as royal decrees, which suggests it was meant as a warning, not a myth. The Sumerians may have watched the stars every night, noting irregular movements, perhaps even a real astronomical anomaly. If a comet or interplanetary body passed close enough to disturb their careful calendars, it would have been a terrifying omen. Modern astronomy has shown that Earth is periodically crossed by debris from long-period comets, some with cycles of thousands of years. A single bright visitor could easily have been remembered as the returning star. The same kind of object, an interstellar traveller like 3I Atlas, would have appeared sudden, luminous, and unexplainable. Exactly the kind of event that would inspire prophecy. The fall of Sumer followed soon after. By 1900 before the Common Era, the last Sumerian kings had been conquered by the Elamites and the Amorites. Their language faded, replaced by Akkadian. Their temples crumbled into dust, but the warning of Nippur remains. When the star of heaven goes astray, the gods will abandon the city. Even as their world ended, the Sumerians believed their gods had not died. They had simply returned to the stars. Later civilizations remembered them under new names: Marduk, Bel, Jupiter, Zeus. But the pattern was the same. The divine always came from the sky and would return there again. When modern astronomers discovered that the planets revolve in predictable cycles, it confirmed what the Sumerians already sensed, that the heavens are a system, not a chaos. Yet they also believed in exceptions, in wanderers that break the pattern. Those were the gods of change, the ones who bring both creation and destruction. Perhaps that is why the idea of Nibiru still captivates people today. Whether it was a real planet, a comet, or a mythic symbol, it represents something profound, the possibility that humanity's story is watched from above, that history moves in cycles written in the sky. Every time a new object enters our solar system from the dark beyond, we remember the first astronomers who tried to make sense of such intrusions. When they saw a strange red light streaking across the horizon, they did not see rock and ice. They saw intention. They saw the return of the Watchers. Today, scientists study fragments of ancient clay under microscopes. They measure isotopes, date layers of silt, and decode star maps carved by hands 5,000 years old. What emerges is a picture of people who were both rational and reverent, engineers and dreamers. They charted the cosmos not out of fear, but out of longing to understand their place in the grand machine of heaven. The Sumerians taught us that knowledge and faith need not be opposites. To them, science was sacred because it revealed the design of the gods. The movement of the stars, the structure of numbers, the cycles of floods and droughts, all were lines of code written into the world. When the last temples closed and their language fell silent, their discoveries did not vanish. They became the foundation of every civilization that followed. The Babylonians inherited their astronomy. The Greeks turned their geometry into philosophy. The modern world still divides time and space by the measures they created. The gods may have left, but their mathematics remained. Yet the feeling of mystery endures. Somewhere beyond the reach of our instruments, another star moves across the black, indifferent sky. Maybe it is just another interstellar wanderer, like 3-Eye Atlas. Or maybe it is the same red star the Sumerians once recorded, returning on a path so vast that no generation could remember its last visit. If they were right, if history truly runs in cycles, then the appearance of a wandering star may not be coincidence at all. It may be a reminder that we are still part of the same story written in clay long ago. 3,000 years before we learned to count time, the Sumerians counted the stars. They recorded everything they saw in fragile tablets of clay and left us a question that refuses to fade. Perhaps all of human history is a single repeating loop, a pattern of rise and fall, of flood and fire, written across the heavens and remembered in the dust. And maybe, just maybe, the Sumerians had seen it all before. If you have stayed with this story until the end, thank you for watching. If you found it meaningful, consider leaving a like or a comment. It helps the story reach more people who love the mysteries of the past. Good night.